we shall make a start. So welcome everyone to the West Devon Audit Committee meeting. We shall start off with the apologies.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Bridgewater. Thank you.
I think we also had them from Steve Hipsey and Jackson Murray as well. Okay, moving on to declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interest they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. No one has anything? No. Thank you. Item number 3, items requiring urgent attention. There are none. This takes us on to item number 4, which is confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of April 2021. Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for the record, I was in attendance at that meeting. I did join a bit late because I had technical issues, but I was in attendance. If that could be amended, please. Thank you.
Okay, we can add that one. I do remember you joining and asking questions. So. Okay, it takes us on to item number 5, which is the Grant Thornton West Devon Borough Council audit plan for the year ending the 31st of March 2021. As said, we have apologies from Jackson Murray from Grant Thornton. We have been asked if anybody had any questions to put them forward, and we would circulate them to Grant Thornton. I mean, I have a few sort of fairly generic questions, which I think Lisa Buckle could probably answer. So if anybody else has any questions, we'll do the same. Shall I start off with my questions? Yeah, on their page 5, page 9 of our agenda, it talks about the first point is the revenue cycle. This is the significant risks identified. The revenue cycle includes fraudulent transactions, open brackets, close brackets, rebutted. I just wonder if we can have an explanation. I know it says rebutted, so whatever they come against, it can be defended, but I just wonder if you could give us an overview as to actually what that means.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. Thank you. So yes, in Grant Thornton's report, and I would like to give Jackson Murray's apologies. He wasn't able to make the meeting today, but an email has gone out to all audit committee members that if they had any questions on the audit plan, that Jackson was very happy to answer those either outside of the meeting. So in terms of the risks which have been identified on page 5 of the Grant Thornton report, yes, it does say that the revenue cycle includes fraudulent transactions. So this is a standard risk that you'd find in all council's audit committee plans for the forthcoming audit. And what Grant Thornton are highlighting there is, as we have a revenue budget, which would include income and expenditure for our services, they are saying that there is always a risk that within those income and expenditure there could be fraudulent transactions. But they are saying that given the controls that the council has in place and the work that they've done on our audits in previous years, that their conclusion is that they do not consider this to be a significant risk for West Devon Borough Council. And therefore, although they've identified the risk for completeness, they are saying that that risk has been rebutted and withdrawn because there are procedures and controls in place to ensure that there aren't fraudulent transactions within our day-to-day services. So that's what they're alluding to there, and they have said there is little incentive to manipulate revenue recognition. So as we are a council, we're not a company that's making profits. As we are a local government council, that's why they're saying that there is no incentive there to manipulate revenue recognition. So that is one of the reasons they are rebutting the risk, and opportunities to do that are very limited. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that a lot of these, I mean, if you go on to sort of, as I sometimes do, just look at other councils' accounts, just to see how they compare with ours, and you actually get word for word the same risks. Obviously, we all have the same risk and the same standardised accounts. So the second question is very similar, really. It's just that the management. When you read about the next item down is the management override of controls. When you first read this, it looks like there's a risk in that our staff may be overriding, or officers may be overriding the controls. That's not actually the case, is it? It's more generic, isn't it? So can you explain that one?
That's exactly right, Chairman. So again, management override of controls is an identified risk that you would see in all councils' audit plans for their financial statements. So again, for completeness, Grant Thornton have identified that that is a risk, but they are also saying on the right-hand side there that they will do testing to get comfort over that risk. So the sorts of testing that Grant Thornton will do during their audit is they would look at our management controls over journals. So for example, if one of the finance team inputs a journal into the system, anything over 25,000 is subsequently checked by a senior officer. So that will be the head of finance, Pauline Henstock, would review all journals over £25,000. We don't have the level of resource to be able to have a second review of all journals for every single journal that is put on the system. That's why we set a limit and test have a second review of anything over 25,000. What Grant Thornton will do is they will ask for a full list of all the journals put on during the financial year, and they will test anything that they feel is unusual. They put it through a computer program who picks out random samples of those journals to do further investigative work on. They ask us for an understanding of our accounting estimates and judgments that we've made by the management. And then if there are any changes in the accounting policies or estimates, we explain those as well. So these are all questions which are asked of management, and I have to sign various things for Grant Thornton so that they are ensured that they have the full knowledge to carry out their audit. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. So although they're listed as significant risks for us, but they are listed probably as a significant risk for every council in the country, probably.
Yes, that's right. And when Grant Thornton bring their audit report back on the accounts, which will be at the end of September, they will describe the testing that they've done against that risk of management override of controls, and they will give a conclusion. So, for example, in previous years' audit reports, they have concluded that as part of their work, that there has been no management override of controls, and you will see that in previous years' audit reports.
Thank you. Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 10, the risk identified there, valuation of land and buildings, including investment properties. I can understand this being a concern, and wondered if we could have some feedback about this, particularly around our investment in our investments that we've got with properties. My main concern, really, I suppose, is around the way COVID has caused work. The way work is conducted to change, and although I dare say lots of people will come back to an office, there is that sort of sense that there'll be more home working, and whether that becomes a threat potentially on our investments in some of the properties we've got. Some feedback on that would be really helpful, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Yes, I can answer that question. So, as part of the financial statements each year, we are required to carry out a fair value valuation of those investment properties. That work has been carried out as part of this year's closure of the accounts. I can assure members that there has been very little change in the valuation of our investment properties. It is very insignificant, so the values are more or less the same as they were the previous year. No significant change. What I can also say is that there will be, as there was last year, material valuation uncertainty disclaimer on those valuations due to COVID. So what the RICS, who are the industry of chartered surveyors, have said is that there is a material uncertainty in all valuations of fixed assets due to COVID. And as we saw in last year's financial statements, that material uncertainty was stated in the fixed asset note. We will still have that again this year. So that will still be there. But the fair value valuations have been carried out on those investment properties, and there's very little change from the previous year. In terms of rental income from those investment properties, again, the vast majority of that rental income has been received. There will be a full report on the investment properties, which is due to come to the Audit Committee meeting. The next meeting, which we've got data next meeting on the agenda, but that will probably be in early September. So as part of the draft accounts, you will see those valuations of those properties, but also as part of a separate report just on the investment properties that will be written by Scott Ramsey, who's a member of our assets team. And that's a report that members would have had before at the Audit Committee. That's purely around those 4 investment properties, which would go into more detail.
Thank you. So that's coming back to the next Audit Committee meeting, but Councillor Ford has a follow-up question.
Sorry, Chairman, just the first part of your explanation, Lisa, talking about the COVID, sorry, I can't remember how you described it now.
They call it a material uncertainty evaluation.
Could you just give some explanation around that? Sorry, I've heard it before, but I can't recall it.
So what the Institute of Chartered Surveyors are saying it's how they value fixed assets. So they will look at a range of things. For example, they will look at the rental income stream that we are getting from those assets. They will look at similar properties within similar areas. So they will make a range of assessments, and that has to be done by a qualified chartered surveyor. We don't have the capacity to do that in-house, which is why we always outsource that piece of work. But all properties that have been valued will have this material uncertainty due to COVID. So that is a national thing. It's not anything specific to our properties. It's something which has come down from the Institute of Chartered Surveyors.
So it's some sort of a protection, is it? Is that what it is? I'm just trying to understand what it is.
Yeah, it's not a disclaimer. It's just saying that bear in mind that the pandemic, across the world would have had an impact on. Okay. It's something that the Institute of Chartered Surveyors will put on all of their valuations. And it's something that we had in the previous year, and it will be going in next year. And that may take a while before that starts dropping off. But as I say, it's a national thing. It's not anything that's specific to our properties.
Thank you, Lisa.
I know it's Wimbledon time, but I feel a bit like them.
Sorry.
Councillor Renders has a question.
Building valuation aside, and I think you might have touched that we might be going through this in more depth at a later meeting. My concern with this is more the revenue stream. Given that more and more people have got used to working from home, are the contracts that we've got in there longer term contracts, is there a risk that the businesses that we have in there currently might take the same stance that a lot of the likes of Grantford, I think it's one of the ones that they're carrying on with working at home rather than going back into the office. And I would have thought that would have to be under the same type of heading as this, because there is a risk there that we then won't get the revenue that we've had because people will not be wanting to rent business premises as much.
That's not something we've seen in the past financial year. We have been receiving that rental income. Obviously, that's always a risk for the future. But as I say, at the moment, we are not seeing any change in that market. So I think we can only probably go on the here and now. But yes, obviously, we will always have an eye to the future.
That's fine, because I'm not aware of the businesses that are actually in there and what they do. So it's
Councillor Renders.
This is probably an immaterial point to us. But I do remember a recall back in September, it was a double glazing company that was struggling to pay the bills, and I think that was about it. I don't know if there's any update on that. I think it's a sort of very micro point or a macro issue. But if you could answer that one, and then I'll wait for the valuation and yield report back in September, or in the forthcoming September.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, we can't go into specifics in a public meeting, but The last budget monitoring report, I think we said to members that we've got a rental income stream over £1 million, and at the last position, we think the sort of amount that we may not be able to collect is probably around 25,000 of that, so it's a very small amount out of the total income stream. Thank you.
Councillor Yellen.
Thank you. Mine's sort of a question, but wanted to give Mrs. Buckle an opportunity if she can to respond. It's relating to page 20, which is the audit fees, noting that the basically gross operating costs are similar year on year, but looking at the actual fee for 2018-19 and the proposed fee for 2021, which is only 2 years difference, it's a 50% increase, and I know it gives the detailed analysis below, but that does seem from 34,835 up to a proposed 50,535. That does seem a pretty steep increase, and I wondered if, and I realise it's the auditors that set fees, but I wondered if you were able to express a bit of a thought on that one.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chairman, I think this has come about really because of two areas. One is around pensions and one is around fixed assets. So both pensions and fixed assets, because we're not a company, we are a council, we have local authority accounts, the amount of work which the auditors do on those two areas is similar to the amount of work that would be done in the private practice if we were a company. And the fact that movements in either the pension liability or the pension assets, or movements in fixed assets, the valuations of our investment properties, that has no impact on our bottom line. So if those, because it's all reversed out, so we're not like a company whereby if you sell an asset or you have movements in the fixed asset valuation, that can have an impact on your bottom line profit and loss account. What council said when when we had the Redmond review was that the amount of work which is done in those two areas is disproportional to the risk really for local government. So a huge amount of work is done by the auditors both on the fixed assets and the pensions for something which has no impact on our bottom line. And so therefore as councils nationally we did feed into the Redmond review, and we were very disappointed, I think, with the outcome of that the Redmond review did not conclude, therefore, that because it didn't impact on council's bottom line, therefore that the amount of audit work done on those areas could be reduced. So therefore, that is the main reason that the fees are increasing. It's because the amount of work that has to be done in those two areas is significantly more than it ever was in the past. Our assets team spent a lot of time last year, and I'm sure they will again this year, on dialogue with the auditors around our fixed assets valuations. But again, that has no impact on our bottom line outcome from the income and expenditure account. So unfortunately, I think those increases in fees are there probably to stay because the Redmond review concluded that work still needed to carry on, as it does for other industries. The only softening, if you like, is that the government have given 15 million to all councils nationally to compensate them for the increase in audit fees. That is only a one-off, but our share of that is likely to be around £20,000. So we will get a bit of money back from government funding for the increase in audit fees, but going forward, I think our fees will be around £50,000, and we'll have to budget at that level in future years.
The irony of this is all quite undervalued for money. Complete misnomer.
Yeah. It's interesting because both myself and Councillor Paul as Vice Chair, we did ask this question to Mrs. Buckle earlier, hoping that we're not going to see sort of £70,000 next year, so Mrs. Buckle thinks it should stay around £50,000, £51,000, that sort of figure. But it's interesting, we're looking at the whole Redmond review. I do remember going back a bit when all the Redmond review information was coming out. I did put the question at the time was, we're supposed to have, the whole point of the Redmond review is to have simplified accounts for the public, but actually when you read through the paperwork, it sounds like there's a lot more work to be produced from the finance teams, which seems a bit ridiculous, so hence the costs are going up, so more things to audit, aren't there? Another question, actually. Oh yeah, on page 15, this is 15 of our agenda, page 11 of their report. It looks at sort of the work that Grant Thornton are involved with or can be involved with, and it looks at sort of giving the electors the opportunity to raise questions about the actual accounts themselves or the financial statements. Do we get any questions?
We have in the past, Chairman, yes. Normally it is sort of only one, but yes, in the past we have had some questions on the accounts. They do go straight to Grant Thornton, and then Grant Thornton will charge the council for the work that's carried out under those public interest reports. So yes, we have had those in the past.
Yeah, so I was thinking, it's one of those things as a council, we're trying to be as open as possible to the electorate. So should we be trying to encourage some more questions? And if so, how can we go about doing that? On the, of course, the negative side is that we have to pay more fees for answering the questions. But then, because this is so much of what the council is about, the finances of the council, the accounts of the council, financial statements. Then, is there a way somehow we can engage more with the public on that? Sorry, just to finish, because I think so I've been the chairman of this committee for quite a few years now, and I've never seen a member of the public. I've never had a question come to a meeting. Is somehow we can engage more to actually get some more questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think that's probably through the audit committee meetings and through the audit committee cycles, and encouraging members of the public, if they do have questions, to attend these meetings, which are public meetings, and to ask those questions. In terms of the questions which are given to the auditors, they are normally very specific, and they're quite strict criteria around the sorts of questions that can be asked, because obviously those are charged for. So yeah, there is a difference between just normal questions that obviously we as officers can ask, and something which a member of the public may feel needs to be investigated. And there's specific criteria around that, and that is something then that the Grant Thornton will look into.
Something else I was going to ask, it's got their hands up at the moment. On our page 16, page 12, it talks about materiality for planning purposes. This is the materiality or material errors. Can you just give us a brief explanation of what this means?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chairman. So when the auditors carry out their audit and report their findings to members around about September time, there has to be a threshold at which they have looked at and decided upon which ones would be material to the account. So, for example, they have calculated that materiality will be just over £500,000 for us as West Devon Borough Council. So therefore what they're saying is if they find any errors when they're auditing our accounts, if the value of that error is above 506,000, then they will require us as management to change the accounts for that error that they have identified. If it is below 506,000, we are not required to change the accounts, and it will just be reported to members as part of the audit opinion on the accounts. Similarly, there is a limit there, 25,000 misstatements reported to the audit committee. So if during testing and during the audit, the auditors were to find something, an error in the accounts to the value of 20,000, they wouldn't report it to the audit committee because they set a threshold of 25,000. If that error that they found was 30,000, it would appear on the report that comes to the audit committee members. So it's a judgment that they have done. They normally use things like net budget, gross expenditure to calculate their materiality, but that's the figures that they are showing there on page 12 of their report. Thank you.
You might just respond to this saying I've just told you this, but I can't. The problem is I'm going from one meeting to the next meeting. I can't remember if I asked you the question in this meeting or the previous meeting. So you may have just answered this already. But performance indicators, which is raised by Grant Thornton, have you addressed that one?
No, not
All right.
yet, Chairman.
Okay, so I don't remember now, I asked you the previous meeting, I think. Would you like to explain that now?
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to find the relevant page.
Page 18.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Yeah, so on page 18 of Grant Thornton's report, and this report was put together a couple of weeks ago, so as part of their sort of work prior to the audit on the financial statements. Yeah, so on page 18 they have said there about assessing performance and identifying areas for improvement. They have highlighted that mainly because they are saying that during the 2021 financial year that we didn't specifically take a report on performance indicators to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. However, a report was taken that reported all of the full performance indicators, and that went to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 13th of April. We are also pulling together our annual report at the moment, which will go forward to consideration to the Hub Committee. And as part of the appendices for that, again, we will report our performance for the year for 2021. Also, management information on things like planning performance has gone to members of the planning committee. We as officers also put measures in place during the pandemic. So, for example, we were putting business continuity measures in place. So there were daily meetings of the management team, looking at the latest guidance and legislation that had come out. We set up an incident management team that met every morning, and as part of that, decisions were made and risks were logged. And since this report has been written, we have been putting together all of our value for money evidence for our auditors, and part of that we have submitted to them, for example, evidence of those meetings taking place. Also, as part of our recovery and renewal plan, which was reported to members during the year, we were focusing on some key issues for the council. So, for example, the administration of the business grants. That was a key focus for many of the teams throughout the council. We had to significantly scale up our operation to deliver and administer those business grants on behalf of the government. We also had our community response in the early days of the pandemic as well, and we were also looking at things like the COVID roadmap. I don't know if Councillor Evans would like to add anything on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bucker. Thank you, Chair. Well, I had prepared a very similar response to the one just given by Mrs. Bucker. So I don't think there's really that much to add. But certainly an acknowledgement that during the past year we've not reported as frequently on management performance for the reasons stated, and also, of course, we've had a new IT platform, and with the intention to use the data on this platform to provide dashboards to members displaying information across the council's services. The IT project has suffered delays due to redeployment of staff, as we've heard, to support the council's COVID-19 response, and in particular to administer the government business grant. So that's a part of the reason for a delay in reporting that information. But looking ahead, with the launch of the new corporate strategy, hopefully in September, part of my resource portfolio is certainly to produce and make sure that members have got business performance information freely available, and again that will be via sort of dashboards, online real-time information regarding council services, and of course that will also be reported regularly into ONS. So that will happen certainly in September to coincide with the new corporate strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Ward.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I just want to tie this up to sort of clarify. I mean, I think we'd all agree that KPIs are really important because they give a good, indication of the travel of improvement or otherwise. That gives members an opportunity to kind of identify something. And I'm pleased to hear the things that Councillor Evans just talked about. Certainly, dashboards were very powerfully and popular at, when I was a member of another place. But I just wanted to be sure about what I've understood you've said in regards to the comment from the auditors. Am I right in understanding that because we missed the deadline for the year, i.e. we were a bit late bringing the report to the to ONS, that was the fundamental reason why they picked this up? So if ONS had been a couple of weeks before, they wouldn't necessarily have picked this up.
I think that's right, Vice Chairman, yes. Also, I think the timing that Grant Thornton have written their report, so this report was written a few weeks ago, and all they are highlighting there is that as part of the audit, they will ask for more evidence of things like performance indicators and the measures that the council's management team put in place alongside members to manage the pandemic. So I think all they're highlighting is that that's some further work they're going to do as part of their value for money audit, and then they will report back to the audit committee members at the end of September. So I think they're just highlighting that they will do some work on that during the audit process.
Through you, Chairman. Thank you for that. I think that's helpful. I mean, I suppose it's good that they've highlighted it, but we're clearly doing a lot to, sort of turn that around, and we've got mitigating circumstances, as probably every council's got,
yes,
for in this area. So I'm encouraged by what I've heard, certainly from Councillor Evans and yourself. So thank you. Appreciate you clarifying that.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think as Councillor Ball said, obviously it's mitigated circumstances, and I think when we got to the internal audit report, you find out most of the reasons there have any delays are from the same exactly the same reasons. It's our staff, we had to prioritise our staff elsewhere, and that's what we did. So things have got delayed, but they've been done, so we catch up with things, which is great.
Chair, perhaps if I may, so perhaps a footnote, perhaps what I should have said is when that report came to, rather belatedly, to ONS in April, members will probably recall what they found was that the services service levels had been maintained through that very difficult period, and in some cases it actually shown improvement compared with previous years. So I think we should acknowledge the tremendous efforts of everyone involved, officers and the supporting members, during such a difficult period that service was able to be maintained. And those reports, that performance was of course reported regularly into SLT meetings, so they would have been aware of the service performance, and of course I'm sure would have flagged that to members if they had any concerns about a particular service area. But yes, it would have been our normal practice to report that quarterly. It hasn't happened for the reasons explained, but absolutely going forward, a robust performance reporting system will be in place, and members will be able to monitor that performance online and through ONS. We're working with Mr. Hawke. We all had a meeting earlier to try and give thought to how a new performance monitoring system would look in the new corporate strategy. So there will be a lot of work to make absolutely sure performance is reported on a regular basis in a meaningful, robust manner. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Evans. I'm pleased you said what you said, actually, because I think the 70 departments need a pat on the back, and then, because actually, it is, in the ideal circumstances, we do need these reports to come to us, but then there were other priorities, not pressing priorities, and which the staff had to be allocated to do. So, okay, I think that's it for the item number 5. We just have to note this if everyone's in agreement.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, the internal audit annual report for 2020-21. Councillor Evans, I believe you're introducing this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As part of the internal audit reporting process, Audit Committee has been receiving updates on the progress made on last year's audit plan. Under the public sector internal audit standards, the head of internal audit is required to present an annual report that provides an opinion that can be used by the Council to inform its annual governance statement. Today's report is that annual report, which summarises the work carried out by internal audit during 2020-21, reviews the performance of the internal audit service and provides an audit opinion on the adequacy of internal control. And as we all know, the last year has been particularly challenging. Overall, and based on the work performed during 2020-21, internal audit is able to provide reasonable assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's internal control environment. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Edmonds. Dominic, you've got to add to that.
Thank you, Chairman. As has been pointed out, this is my annual report that sets out the work that the internal audit team carried out between April 2020 and March 2021. As I've been reporting during the year, COVID has impacted progress with both members of my team assisting with the processing of business grants during the first lockdown, and one of my team resuming that role again last autumn, leaving my other auditor to pick up the majority of planned audits. In the end, 11 of the 47 planned audits have been deferred or not started as of the 31st of March 2021, and most of which appear in this year's audit plan. This is reflected in the performance stats in the table on page 35, although it is pleasing to note that we recorded no days of sickness in the 12-month period, despite pandemics, etc. Under the section Key Findings, as in previous audit annual reports I've presented to members, I provide details of those audits where our audit opinion falls into the two lowest categories of audit opinion. For the second year running, we have no audits in the lowest category, and for 2021, 5 audits came back with either improvements required or limited assurance being one of the new titles of our newly introduced categories. Members have been presented actually with details of those findings in previous progress reports, but I set out the details for you in my narrative in this report. Since my last progress report in April, we've continued progress with completing some of the key financial systems audits, which saw us issue 3 final reports. Our findings and responses from officers are Appendix B in the report. At the time of writing this annual report, 2 audits have drafted the reports issued, and I can update members to say that these 2 audits have actually been finalised and final reports issued in the last few days. The fieldwork has been completed on 1 other audit, namely housing benefit, and the draft is actually on my desk to be reviewed. We await responses from officers to the recommendations made on a number of our draft reports, and once we have those responses, we can then issue a final version of those reports. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Chairman, I know that we talked about this one earlier on, and I can't remember whether you were going to ask the question or I was, but in relation to, on page 41, the building maintenance work schedule, obviously there's been an impact again because of COVID, and we can understand that, but obviously something like this is important because, as you said earlier, you know, the further things slip, the likelihood of additional costs and so on. So I know that there was an update in February, and I know this is sort of, includes part of that, but I wondered whether you could just give us a forward-looking update on this one, Dominic.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I have no immediate update. I can tell you that we will be doing a formal follow-up in this area as part of this year's audit plan, so we'll be able to report on progress against the actions that were agreed in our final report.
But I'm happy, I'm content with that. I assume that will come forward at the next meeting. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Richards.
Yes, while we're on building maintenance, I thought that was an interesting report, page 5. I think when it does come out, I think what we're potentially alluding to is a sort of wholesale nature of potential change here. One, to meet our green agenda, because then we're having less people travelling throughout, and the second point is actually reducing charges for our ratepayers. So, because we're able to contract out to other people, to smaller contractors outside of the council who probably live in the locality. So, to my mind, it's a very interesting report, and reading it, one I think that probably it requires further examination and maybe a relook at that organisation or that part of what West Devon's offering, and do we change our operations? Less retained staff, more contract management, able to assess the situation, a bit like Kent County Council, so they're less staff, more people who manage contracts and then contract out, to for those two benefits. Thanks.
Yeah, because following on from the whole building maintenance work scheduling, obviously you've given it the category of limited assurance. It would be nice to move that to reasonable assurance or even substantial assurance at some stage. But one of the things that concerns me, obviously, that's been pointed out already, but if building maintenance falls behind, then we could suddenly find ourselves sitting in a room with a water, rainwater coming from the ceiling, or T-lock checking it. And one of the things you do highlight, actually, as a council, we don't actually have a policy, a mainstream policy on property. So is that something that we need to address, or? But it's something we need to address, and we've got no policy on.
Yes, Chair. I would say you need to set out your strategy and policy as to how you tackle maintenance. I know some councils, it's a balance between planned maintenance and reactive maintenance. A lot of councils, given the financial situations, etc., are more towards reactive and just dealing with the issues when they occur, rather than doing planned maintenance that stops the issue happening in the first place.
Yeah, the problem is if you're doing reactive maintenance, it's proving a lot more expensive.
Can I just come back on that point? I think it may really good points being raised here. Just what an audit's for, but maybe we need to strategically look at this. It's rather it's the planned maintenance. There will always be reactive maintenance because I don't think it's planned for, but also how do we implement it going forward? And probably. Should this be taken to a senior leadership team, a task and finish group that looks into this very matter? Because I think this is a good report. It's identified a lot, and maybe there's a better strategic approach that fills our council objectives of doing things differently.
Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully support Councillor Richard's point. I think, us in the Royal Navy, we had the planned maintenance was done religiously, and it was done for a reason. That if you did the planned maintenance, you're less likely to have things break down at an inconvenient time. And I think, I'm not suggesting we take military action. I think having a fresh look at this and through the way that Councillor Richard suggested, I fully support that suggestion.
Okay, so by the sounds of it, it looks like we need to have a policy on it, which is raised that we haven't got a policy. So does this committee do that, or is it the hub, or?
Can I just check maybe Dominic, because my understanding is that there is a schedule in place.
I was just about to say,
maintenance.
Chairman, at the bottom of page 31, I do point out that at the time of the audit there was a development of a comprehensive schedule. The West Devon one was more complete than the South Hams one. But of course, COVID's kind of got in the way to actually formally complete it. That's a major step, is to identify what assets you've got and identifying a schedule for making sure that they're maintained to a good standard. So I think there is a positive there at the bottom of page 31, certainly.
I think we're missing the point here. On my point is, I don't dispute that. I'm sure it is all in place. There is regular maintenance and there is a plan, but it's how we implement. And I think this is what's coming out from this report is that do we go down that approach with our retained staff, or actually do we use staff? We have a very, very big geographical area. It takes a lot of time to get to certain places. Do we take a different approach for it's our routine maintenance or or the tactical maintenance that has to happen, that we take a more contracting out approach and we find people in the locality who are closer to it, and from what we're saying in this report, probably cheaper as well. So that's two objectives, being greener and also reducing the cost out. And what I'm saying is we might need a review of this whole area, the implementation of it. And does it go to a task and finish group? Does it go back to the senior leadership team to produce a paper for this committee or to the hub? I'm not sure where it goes next, and I'd appreciate some advice on that. But it's the implementation. Thank you.
That's a good point. I think it all comes under resources out there.
Well, yes, thank you. Well, perhaps we can put the proposed advisory groups, and this is perhaps one for them to get involved in. If you go to the appropriate advisory group, which would either be under resources or maybe assets, wherever that is now, it's under economy or whatever, maybe this is one that could be put to the advisory group to consider the points raised by Councillor Bridges in conjunction with the key officers who lead on this area.
That does seem a sensible approach. Can we make sure that happens?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you. I'm looking at that. Right. Okay. So moving on from the building maintenance, work scheduling, etc. One of the questions I had was insurance. And I know we raised this at the last meeting about the issues concerning, obviously lots of things haven't been done because of COVID-19, I appreciate that. But we've been given this limited assurance on our overall insurance policies. Have we progressed anywhere with this at all since the last meeting?
I can, COVID has, again, on this one, has got in the way. There are some issues that will take time to implement, and therefore they take over a longer period, as well as a few quicker wins, I would say. But essentially, officers' time has been diverted onto COVID response, etc. So, it is a concern that there hasn't been any movement. But we've accepted that in this situation that we're in, that this is the state of play as it stands. I don't know whether Neil will be able to.
Probably need to press the side.
Thanks, Dominic. Just to add to that, Chairman, we are continuing to monitor our insurance coverage. We have just extended our insurance for 2 years, so we do have 2 years of cover in place, which was an option available under the existing contract. I think it's important to state at this stage that we're not concerned that we're not insured. We have insurance in place, but it's, are we over-insured? Are there opportunities for us to reduce our coverage and generate savings? Those are the sorts of elements we want to look at, and are there opportunities to do it differently? I mean, typically we bring a broker in and we go to the market. There are new ways of delivering insurance now. There are, local government association have an insurance mutual. I suspect that would be too costly for us, but all of those things we want to consider over the next 2 years. So that's really where we need to get to. But just to reassure that we have insurance in place, as guided by brokers, but it's just making sure that we're not over-insuring in any areas, really. I think that's a fair statement, Dominic, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a fair statement. It was a question of, the council is insured, yes, maybe over-insured, but are you doing it in getting the best value? And as Neil has pointed out, there's different ways of doing, getting insurance cover. And it's just looking at all those different ways and defining a strategy. So if we say, yes, we will not go down brokerage, we will go through government mutual and have that as a strategy.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's like Councillor Bridges said, things have changed, our usage of properties have changed, and so therefore our whole insurance cover must have changed. So as long as we're looking at that, we did follow it through, then we'll have to keep an eye on that. Obviously, you'll be keeping an eye on it for internal audit. The other thing I was going to look at was on page 33, it talks about we've been given limited assurance on performance management on the data quality assurance strategy, not being brought to the attention of staff for some time. Not that I expect an answer now, because I know what the answer is going to be. It's the same answer as on the others who would report delays in this area, but I'm sure this is something that obviously we want to move over. We've got to keep an eye on these limited assurances because we want to move them up. Certainly to reasonable assurance, certainly make sure they don't fall downwards. And that's gets us in trouble. But so, just trying to work forward, how we move forward on this then? We need to address that one, don't we?
Sorry, Mr. Hawke, is that something you're able to assist with? Thank you.
I can, Lisa, yes. I think it really follows on from the conversation that Councillor Edmund started earlier around our performance management in its entirety. Something we're keen to do, I think, obviously there have been highlights there where information has been slightly inaccurate in reports or it's not been referenced correctly. I think that's one of the issues. So for last year's annual report, we took some national statistics related to West Devon, but we didn't reference at what point in time. So by the time the annual report was published, a new set of data was made available. So then anybody looking at it would think, well, that's not the story that we're being told nationally. So I think what we're trying to do as part of the new corporate strategy, and I'm not trying to hang everything on the new corporate strategy, but we certainly will be having an agreed suite of data sets that underpins the new corporate strategy. So whatever officers are preparing reports and presenting information to committee, we're all using the same data sets. I think that's really important, and I think that's, to me, is the important element, is we get agreed data sets up front. We're all referencing the same data. Number of houses in fuel poverty was one, I think, that the position had changed from the point it was published. So let's get an agreed point in time and all refer to the same point in time, so that as far as members are concerned, we're presenting the same data.
Thank you. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on that anyway, because it's might be on the internal audit. Something else I had was, not going into specifics, but on page 34, talks about irregularities. There were no irregularities to report arising from day-to-day operations of the council, which is good. But there were these 8 cases which have been reported to the Devon Audit Partnership. Again, I said I don't want to go into specifics, but do we have an update? Are they still progressing, or we had finalised anyway?
I think Lisa will be able to.
I'm happy to answer those questions, Chairman. So yes, members will be aware that since last year we have been administering the business grants for the government, and a significant amount of money has gone through on administering those grants. As part of that, because we don't have an in-house fraud team, we did enter into a service level agreement with the Devon Audit Partnership, so that if we had any cases, and we have had 8, whereby we were suspecting a fraud, those irregularities were reported to the Devon Audit Partnership, and all of those have been reported onwards to the National Anti-Fraud Network, NAFIN. So they have all been reported. One in particular there had been, we highlighted it, and on investigation it could be seen that it was a national fraud picked up by somebody in our team. So that was something that did go on a more national basis. We do get fraud newsletters come through, and we make sure that those are distributed to the team. So, for example, if we can see a pattern of fraud coming from certain types of email addresses or applications coming in, and those are circulated to other councils so that the team can be notified of what to account for in those applications. So because we don't have our own house full team, we do engage the services of Devon Audit Partnership, and I'd very much like to thank them for their work in that area. Thank you.
Councillor Devon was first.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to your point about following up on these on the points raised in the internal audit, as you may know, internal audit now falls under resources. So it's my intention, and Mr. Moses is not aware of this yet, but I propose that we set up a regular meeting and no doubt the first item on the agenda will be to pick up on the points that were raised in the audit, and then I can liaise with the appropriate officers to make sure that the appropriate actions are being taken to ensure that they don't reappear on the audit. And I'm happy to be accountable to this committee in terms of making sure that that happens and to give regular progress updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. So, Councillor Ball, then Councillor Yellen.
Thank you, Chairman. So just coming back to the 8 cases, obviously I know we can't talk about detail, but just as a general thing, was there any cost to us as a result of those? Obviously can't go into detail, but just as a general question.
No, there wasn't any cost to us. We are paying for Devon Audit Partnership's time. But again, we are also paid by the government to administer those business grants. So, yes, no, there hasn't been any cost to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, that sort of kind of is part of my question, but not so much about the cost. It's really the responsibility. Is it our responsibility to follow this through to its bitter end, if you like, with what could be within that, or does it revert back to central government at some point, seeing as the funding initially came from them for us to administer?
Yes, no, it will always remain our responsibility. And I am the key responsible person for fraud for the council. So ultimately, yes, it's my responsibility, but I think what we will see over certainly the next 12 months and probably next 18 months is a lot, once the business, we are nearly at the end of administering those business grants now, and I think there will be a whole audit process which happens in the next 12 months to 18 months. So at the moment, the government department bays have asked to see samples, so they've picked out certain grants and asked to see all of the fraud measures that we had in place for individual grants. So already we've sent off details and 15 of those, and that's for the early grant schemes. I think that will continue over the next 18 months. So I think there will still be quite a bit of work, certainly for some team members in our business grants team to facilitate that over the next year to year and a half before those programmes are sort of formally closed down by the government. But yeah, there still will be retrospective work for us, I think.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. We've carried out, one of my auditors has carried out some work for Lisa in terms of looking at doing some testing and looking at the actual process of sorting out these grants. And I think that report is just about to be issued. And I think it's a good standard. The one thing, obviously, being with part of Devon Audit Partnership, we've got a number of councils as clients. I must admit, this time last year, or even say April time, all these grants were starting to be issued and so forth. Southampton, West Devon were one of the councils that were very quick to get procedures in place. We had sight as your internal auditors of those, so we could comment, and they were as robust as possible they could be, given the urgency to get the money out. And that was the push, I think, at the time, and that's what people will forget. When people start to say, well, so much money has been fraudulently claimed, etc., people have to cast their minds back to the late March, early April last year, and the push to get the money out as quickly as possible. And I think Southampton and, of course, West Devon were in a really good place to make sure that we were carrying out the right checks. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things I was thinking of actually. What we've seen a lot of in the press is about how many fraudulent claims we're going through nationally. So I suppose we've narrowed it down to 8 in West Devon. It's not bad really. But it's one of those things that we keep hearing about procedures in West Devon, and certainly within the finance team being exemplary. And we keep congratulating you on that in your team. But in one way, so someday we might become complacent in that area, just but I don't think we will. But I think just again, congratulations, Lisa, to the team. And in terms of auditor says well done, then
Thank you very much.
no auditors like to say well done. So
Chair, can I just echo that? reading through this, it's a great report. I mean, it's really frank, precise, it's really pithy. Thank you, Chris and the team. It sets out very clearly. It gives councillors an opportunity to come and pick up in particular areas in question. I think it's a really good, well-written report, and it's just the sort of report we should get. Some I do receive in West Devon, largely from outside bodies who are a little bit verbose and overlong. Some probably are justifying some very expensive fees for doing it. But this was great. You to be commended. Thank you.
Chairman.
Councillor Paul?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. I actually have written down thank audit team, so fully support the comments made. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it actually goes a lot wider than the audit team, the finance team. It's the whole, one of the officers, the senior leadership team, have actually put in such a good structure in place that then, when the internal audit's carried out, it's congratulates us as the council for the procedures we have in place and how quickly they went in place. And I think it's one of those things. I remember quite a few years ago now, one of the external auditors saying that part of their role was to make sure that we asked the right questions as an audit committee. But sometimes when you go through the reports, it's difficult to find a question because you actually have the question and you go through the report and then you get the answer. So that echoes really what yeah. Okay, I think we got to the end of this one on the agenda. So we have two recommendations on page 27 in the agenda. Are we all happy that we accept these? Yes, thank you. So we move on to the item number 7, which is the strategic risks update. On the portfolio of legal counsel, and Neil, are you going to present this or the leader of the council?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. You'll see in front of you a paper about the strategic risk update. This obviously is in accordance with the strategy that was adopted by the Council. It sets out the roles and responsibilities for committees and groups, and the Audit Committee is asked to provide independent assurance to the Council on the effectiveness of the risk and opportunity management, internal control, and overall assessment framework. I'm happy to take any questions there might be on the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Richards?
Yes. Just in the strategic risk register, there's risk titled inadequate staff resourcing. Just looking at, reading through some of the points. One question do we ask, do we have a problem recruiting? And also, do we monitor when we do recruit, what's the sort of vacancy period range? Because that might tell us a bit whether there's some particular issues if we've got jobs open for a long time.
Thank you. I don't know whether Mr. Walker's able to give me any advice on that, but I know there are certain areas where we do have problems recruiting, and I think those areas continue to be difficult at the present time. Mr. Walker, be able to give me any more detail on that?
I can, Leader. Yes, I think, as the Leader said, there are areas. Planning, is an area that we struggle, and we've struggled with for years, and I think nationally there's a struggle in that area. But in terms of the majority of roles, no, we don't struggle. I think we do consider every role on a case-by-case basis in terms of periods of advertising. Generally, the minimum is 2 weeks. So we do advertise for a minimum of 2 weeks, and we do promote it in a number of places. So whereas we used to just advertise roles on the West Devon website, we're now part of a wider Devon recruitment portal. So we do advertise all of our jobs across all of Devon, which I believe has helped with this recruitment.
Thank you. That's really helpful. It's probably why I'm not aware that it introduces, we don't want it to be death by KPI, but we might want to measure particular planning to see if that is coming up or down by a sort of listing, how long a job is vacant before, and it might give us a gauge. Am I able to ask another question?
Ms. Martin, sorry, you can ask as many as you like.
Oh, great, thank you. So the health and wellbeing service provision, I think I may have mentioned this at main council on Zoom a while ago. It's interesting to see we are having there is a bit of comeback and usage of Fusion. One thing I didn't mention in those reports back in that time, this was in the autumn, is I didn't think they were doing enough to market, to get out there and tell people it is open. I haven't seen ads in the local press. And one of the things that they can do very cost effectively is get themselves onto Instagram, Facebook, and I don't see anything. And I'm a bit disappointed because these figures are reasonable, but I think they could be doing a lot more. And they just need to give a shot in the arm to Tavistock and Canton by doing a little bit of outward push advertising. And, you know, I'm probably, I don't know whether I'm being 52 now, beyond the age cut-off point, but I don't know if my children haven't seen it in their 20s, but I haven't seen any communication from them. And I would have thought I would have seen something online. But that's probably a comment to this, but I'm interested to see the progress, but I think they could be doing some more, and I'll make that comment.
Thank you. I think that comment is noted. I know there was a lot of publicity that went out the first time the centres reopened, and it was very disappointing when everything was clamped down again from that perspective. I know they've been working quietly behind the scenes and keeping up to date with their membership. There are still difficulties, of course, with getting numbers of people together indoors to do certain activities. And my guess would be that quite a lot is hanging on the 19th of July and opening up. So I'm sure we'll see more coming forward at that point.
Yeah, I appreciate that our comms team do a lot on Facebook and Twitter, but it's very difficult when suddenly, things are open. No, they're not. Yes, they are. You know, the government keeps changing the goalposts. So that's what it is.
Sorry, just to come back on that point. That's not a critique of our team. I think it's Fusion. You need to go out there with some more communications, and not just to a sort of organic network. People have signed up to receive it, like we do at the council. You need to get out there and tell people who aren't getting the message. You know, the rest who aren't engaged with the council, that we're doing activity in a planned programme.
Yeah, I fully appreciate that. I was just trying to endorse that our team is doing their part. But
I would agree.
But it is difficult because I think a lot of us who have got, well, so we all have in a way, got the leisure centres in our areas, or our lecturers going to these centres. We do get a lot of phone calls as councillors saying, I'm not too sure actually what's going on and what time I can go swimming and can't go swimming. So you're probably correct in that, councillor, because that more information does need to go out there. Okay, do we have any other questions?
Chairman, I do attend regular monthly meetings with Fusion, so I can feed that back to them.
Well, if nothing else then, it's the recommendation that the Audit Committee review the strategic risk register, make recommendations to the Council on any further action the committee concludes should be considered. So we've done that, so is everybody happy with us accept that recommendation? Okay, so thank you, Councillor Drury and Mr Hawke for that. So next point is we get to the date of the next meeting. Lisa, you wanted to say something about this?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I think at the moment the date of the next meeting, we've got it in the calendar for Tuesday the 3rd of August. And we were wondering if we could cancel that one and instead rearrange it for Tuesday the 7th of September. And the reason for that is that our draft accounts will be published by the end of July. And we could then consider those draft accounts at the meeting on Tuesday the 7th of September. Meanwhile, Grant Thornton would have started their audit, and we would probably need another audit committee on Tuesday the 28th of September, which is the last week in September, for the auditors to present yourselves with their audit opinion on the accounts and also to consider the audited accounts. I know we normally have a couple of months between considering the draft accounts and the audited accounts, but this year it would only be sort of 3 weeks in between them. But if those dates were okay with audit committee members, we were wondering if we could change them to those times. Thank you.
Is everybody happy with that recommendation?
Chairman, would that be a morning or an afternoon meeting?
I think we could do either. So
I'm easy either way.
whichever's best.
Just put it in the diary.
Do either, but not both.
There is a council, I think, on I'm sorry, I'll just check there is a council on one of those days, so I think the morning would be better. I'll just double check. Yes, so on the 28th, there's full council at 4 o'clock. So whether it be better to have a morning meeting with the audit committee, because I know members do have group meetings before council.
Right, that's a nice way to spend my birthday, the 28th. All in the morning.
Should we make it in the afternoon then?
So, sorry, what we're saying, so you're saying the 7th and the 28th?
Yes,
Okay.
please. 7th to consider the draft accounts and 28th the audited.
Chairman, and the 28th in the morning, I will have development management chairman's briefing.
Would it be better to have it at 2 o'clock or even 1 o'clock? Because it should be, it would only be really the audited accounts and Grant Thompson's report on the audit.
So it shouldn't take too long, should it?
We could make it a one-item agenda.
I think the chair's briefing usually is a couple of hours, 10 till 12, and that will, I imagine, be remote, so I don't know if I've got time to get down here. Yeah, but I would be able to do morning, 10 o'clock, that's what I'm saying.
Are there group meetings before a full council meeting?
Quite often.
Yeah. Unless we made it a bonus.
I mean, if it's only going to be a short meeting, one item agenda, it shouldn't take too long, so we could hold it at 1 o'clock. Hopefully we finish soon after that.
Yeah.
Say we allow an hour, there's still plenty of time for everyone to have their group meetings before, say their group meetings at 3 o'clock or whatever.
Yeah. That would be okay. Thank you.
Sorry?
So, birthday's fine. So what, so that we're going from 1 o'clock on the 28th, what time did we say for the 7th? Sticking at 2 or?
I think from an officer point of view, we could do either, so whatever's best for members.
So you choose, I think.
2 o'clock?
2 o'clock, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, on the basis of settled on that one, that brings us to an end to this meeting.